Terrifying attacks by orcas on boats off the Iberian Peninsula have sent shockwaves through the marine community. Now, finally, scientists have worked out exactly why the killer whales are behaving this way. Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce. Whilst captive orcas have been known to attack people and even sometimes tragically kill them, in the wild there have never been any such incidents reported. Orcas, or killer whales, are apex predators of the oceans. They take down the most feared great white shark, devouring their nutrient-dense livers and tossing the rest of the carcass aside. But the largest member of the dolphin family was never considered a threat to humans. Until now. Sailors off the coasts of France, Morocco, Spain, and Portugal have been targeted by the small population of Iberian orcas. Between 2020 and 2024, vessels were struck by the orcas no less than 673 times. What began as a few incidents taking fishermen and leisure yachts by surprise started to take a sinister turn. The pod of orcas actively sought out medium-length sailboats that were no greater than 29 feet in length, and with male orcas weighing in excess of 6 tons and powering through the water at speeds of up to 35 miles per hour. A clash with one of these animals can cause a huge amount of damage. In fact, one sustained attack on October 31st, 2023, on a yacht lasted 45 minutes. The target was a Polish yacht in the Strait of Gibraltar. It was used to run sailing holidays in the Mediterranean, but for some reason the pod of orcas seemed to take a disliking to it. During the ordeal, the crew noticed that the repeated ramming, during which the crew tried desperately to get away from the killer whales and save the yacht, was very targeted. They weren't just hitting the sides or hull of the yacht. The orcas were specifically smashing into the rudder, and they didn't stop until the vessel sank near the port of Tanger Med. Other boats that had similar incidents also reported damage to their rudders. One sailor watched in horror as the orcas ripped the rudder off his catamaran and swam about playing with it in their mouths. There was nothing anybody could do, as the orcas are a protected species, and this group in particular, consisting of around 40 individuals, are considered critically endangered by the IUCN. But it was clear that something had to be done, as there was a chance that somebody could be killed if this behavior continued. But why were the orcas doing this in the first place? If scientists could get to the bottom of the attacks, then maybe it would help them come up with a solution. Before the scientists got involved, the public began to speculate, and the rumors began flying. Some believed that the orcas were acting out some kind of revenge for something traumatic that may have happened to them in the past. It wasn't that long ago that orcas were persecuted and driven to the brink of extinction. Elsewhere, in the Salish Sea, the population of orcas were nicknamed blackfish by fishermen who resented the killer whales as they claimed they took all their salmon. In response, the fishermen actively hunted them. But that wasn't the only time the orcas were destroyed. They were also captured for their oil. It was a booming industry that resulted in mass slaughter of the species. Could it be that the whaling scars ran so deep that the orcas were now seeking revenge? Most people thought it was unlikely. Another rumor was that the orcas were struggling to find enough food and saw boats as competition for their food source. Other, more unlikely suggestions were that the orcas were rising up against the super rich. But none of these suggestions was correct. It would take a proper investigation to find out the answer. And to do that, the Spanish and Portuguese governments organized an investigation into the behavior. Marine biologists, those working in the marine industry, and government officials worked together to prepare a report in the hope that they could shed some light onto the unusual behavior. Looking elsewhere around the globe, there weren't any other pods that had been reported targeting boats, at least not on the same scale as the Iberian population. What scientists were sure of was that the apparently aggressive behavior had spread throughout the pod. Orcas often like to copy each other, and there have been lots of observations where wild orcas have developed fads. These come and go just like they do in humans. Perhaps one of the more unusual fads to take off was in 1987. A female who belonged to a pod in the Puget Sound area of the Northeast Pacific swam around with a dead salmon on her head. It was quite peculiar, but it appeared that she was having fun. Surprisingly, the behavior spread throughout the pod and into 2 neighboring pods over the course of 5 or 6 weeks. During that time, it wasn't uncommon to see other orcas wearing dead salmon hats. But that fad disappeared just as quickly as it had arrived. Could the boat attacking and specific fascination with the rudders also be a fad? Scientists thought that it was entirely possible. What had started with just a couple of individuals had spread throughout the local population of orcas, which resulted in a sharp rise in the number of orca boat interactions. The orcas had discovered something entertaining and something fun to do with the boats that were passing through their waters. All of a sudden, the scientists were painting the orcas as being playful rather than being aggressive, and that changed everyone's perspective on it. It is well known that orcas enjoy the sensation of the propeller wash. They often follow boats, swimming just behind them with their snouts just feet from the spinning propeller. This is known as prop watching. The investigation team thought that one of the orcas got overexcited, most likely a youngster, and bashed into a rudder whilst enjoying the propeller wash. When the rudder came away, it was like some kind of reward, and that's all they needed to repeat the behavior. But that's not all. During their investigation, the team found a promising reason for the orca's playfulness. The pod appeared to be healthy, have access to lots of food, and contain a significant number of juveniles. All in all, the orcas were thriving, and because of that, they had more time to play and socialize. They weren't constantly struggling to survive, spending all their time hunting for fish. Instead, they were spending their spare time having fun, and what better way to do that than bash into boat rudders? However, to people who owned the boats that were under threat, the behavior didn't look like fun. It looked quite menacing. But that's something orcas are known for. They certainly play rough. Another fad behavior learned from other orcas involves porpoises. The southern resident killer whale population of Washington, USA, play with porpoises in the harbor, but they aren't gentle with the much smaller cetaceans. Sometimes they play with them to death, knowing that the rudder-damaging behavior is playful and is likely linked to so-called prop watching. Doesn't necessarily make it any easier for boat owners, but it is good to know that there is no aggression behind it. So, what do the scientists recommend for anyone venturing out in a boat off the Iberian Peninsula? The teenage behavior is clearly damaging to boats, but the orcas are only doing it because the props and rudders look interesting to them. They get a buzz out of doing it. So, if there was a way of making the boats less interesting, then that might deter them. Scientists have just trialed a method which involved making boat propellers abrasive and bumpy in the hope of deterring the killer whales. Whilst this proved to lessen the likelihood of attacks, it wasn't a universal solution, and concerns were raised about the effects on the orcas. For now, the scientists suggest that mariners spend as little time as possible in the known conflict zones, that they move at least 1 to 2 miles away from the orcas as quickly as possible when spotted, and they report the interaction immediately and head for land to expedite a rescue if needed. They stress that people involved should avoid trying to scare the orcas away with loud noise, as the orcas may start to associate the noise with part of the game, and it may only serve to encourage them even more. Although no clear solution has been identified to minimize these attacks, it does look like the behavior has peaked. The attacks are already becoming less common than a year or two ago. So perhaps the scientists were right. This is just another fad that will come and go, just like the salmon hat wearing fad.